Hello and welcome to B2B Revenue Leaders. I'm your host, Dustin. As always, this podcast is brought to you by Testimonial Hero. Testimonial Hero helps tell your customer stories in the form of video testimonials that are recorded on location, remotely with a live producer, or fully async via software to help you let your customers sell for you. On this episode, I'm joined by Ben Slater, who is the Senior VP of Marketing at Beamery. We talk about Ben's journey from pre-revenue all the way to building a unicorn at Beamery. And it's unique because few marketers stay on for that whole journey. We talk about how he adapted, how he went through deciding who to hire first, and what he'd change if he could go back in time. Hey, Ben, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here.
So this is going to be a good one. We're going to be talking about, your journey all the way. I already screwed that up, Journery, because Beamery is the company that you had this growth at, but all the way from pre-revenue, to Series D unicorn and kind of your path there. But before we do that, something you mentioned before we went on air is around, relevancy matters a lot more than personalization. So let's hit that topic real quick before we dive in. Can you explain your thoughts on that?
So for me, when I consider this, I'm thinking about it, at least in this context, through the prism of cold email. And, we all get a lot of cold email messages on LinkedIn, unsolicited calls. And what I want to see, what any potential buyer of software wants to see is you understand and can potentially solve a problem that I have versus, you've read my bio, my LinkedIn profile, and you've dropped in a few personal details with mail merge functionality. So, for me, anyone, and you can extrapolate this obviously beyond cold email to any form of kind of sales and marketing, it always matters more how you're going to help me achieve my goals in my role, right? How you're going to help me or my company achieve, the business strategies that we have versus, kind of light touch personalization. Because I think we're entering an era now where that form of personalization is pretty straightforward to execute, at least to some level at scale. And it just slightly commoditizes it. Sure, it means that if you're not doing it right, it really stands out. But it does mean that, you have to go a little bit deeper than that and you have to really understand the problem.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and it can come across as kind of hacky when you get it. Like I get all the time. So if you're going to pitch me something, don't do this because I get it a lot. But, hey, I listened to this podcast with Ben. It was great. By the way, we sell cold email software and there's no tie-in. There's no relation. They think that will catch my interest. And it does for a second because I'm like, oh, they actually listened. And then you realize pretty quickly, they didn't. It's just like a database plugging this in.
Exactly. No, don't do the bait and switch.
Yeah, nothing worse. Cool. So I think that was a good one to hit up front. The other thing I want to talk about is, from in my world, I've lived in mostly startup Series A early stage. And, you started there or even earlier, really, at Beamery as, I believe, the first marketer. Is that right?
I joined as employee 4 or 5. So first commercial hire into the business. I joined at a time, and Beamery was founded in London, right? And you have this, this sort of classic Silicon Valley style story of, starting, a company with a few folks in a garage and kind of going from there. And obviously, the likes of Apple have really, made these stories, something of kind of Silicon Valley folklore. We actually started in a London garage, and it was a few engineers in kind of a converted London garage, and myself and our CEO in the living room. So yeah, many moons ago.
Yeah, so starting there to where you are now, obviously a lot of growth, a ton of change because now Series D unicorn. I think you said 50-ish person marketing team versus you as the only go-to-market person. So I want to start actually back at the beginning because, there are people in that stage right now with COVID and everything. A lot of new companies popped up. AI, there's about 1 billion AI companies popped up. So I think a lot of people are in that garage trying to figure out how to grow and learn. So what was your approach then as the first person building out marketing and sales? Like, where did you start from ground zero?
Yeah, I think the very early stages of a startup are... and the world of company building and sales and marketing is full of military analogies, right? So you'll have to give one more, but it's very much hand-to-hand combat, right? You are every day trying to figure out how to incrementally move forward, how to, get a message that cuts through slightly better, how to, enhance the product, how to connect with customers. And I think the things that are most important at that stage are perseverance, belief, and a alignment and commitment to the mission of the company. Beamery, our mission is to unlock the potential of every human on the planet, right? And that's an exciting mission that can carry you through times which are harder and times that are tough. Because, in the very early days of building a software company, there are a lot of dark nights of the soul, right? And a lot of times where you have to come back the next day and you have to try something different. And so that's the advice I would certainly give to anyone who is, in that proverbial garage right now, is just keep going, right? Because often it's as simple as that.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned, coming back and trying something different. I think that's a key point as well, because unless you're incredible or you fluke out, you're probably not going to get everything right the first time. And it's going to be a lot of testing, trying, failing, testing, trying, failing. So I think speed is likely another important thing there. Like don't dwell and ruminate on every single detail. Get it out there and let the market kind of tell and go from there.
Yeah, exactly, right? I think speed is a superpower in startups, especially for what you mentioned, right? Which is, let's get some feedback on this idea and let's iterate based on that. But also because, whether you're venture backed, whatever the model is, you're working against a finite time frame before you run out of money, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So startups, dying creatures,
yeah,
right? By their very nature.
Yeah, only a certain percentage make it, right? So do what you can, sprint as fast as you can. So I think a transition a lot of people maybe struggle with coming out of that stage is you kind of have to be a doer, get your hands dirty. You were probably doing a million different jobs there, from sales calls to website copy to you name it, messaging, positioning. And then it gets to the point where you have to hire and delegate that. Mm-hmm. And that's a difficult hurdle for some people. So going back, I'm curious, like what were, you started to get traction, started to grow a little bit. What were those first hires that you made back then, and why did you go that route?
Yeah, so for us at Beamery, we made the decision very early on that we wanted to focus on building organic brand thought leadership through content. And, the space that we were in was this, it's obviously developed since then, but was this emerging category within the sphere of talent acquisition, where businesses were, starting to use techniques and tactics that are, well founded in marketing actually, and applying those to the talent journey. So treating their candidates like customers.
Yep.
And at the time, it was something that, businesses were excited about, but, weren't necessarily ready to take the next step. So we really invested heavily in thought leadership. And so the first hire I actually made was a content hire, right? And I think I interviewed 80, 90 candidates before I found someone that I felt had the right skills and the right level of drive to fully own that. I think when you are in that position as the first marketer and you're juggling all the balls and you're, as you say, kind of doing everything from sales calls to writing website copy, it can be hard. And this is obviously a coaching moment for folks that are kind of earlier in their career. It can be hard to kind of give things up.
Yeah.
And for me, I think it was very important, given the fact this was such a central strategy for the business, to find someone that was, really strong in this area, had a very strong spike about writing. And communication. So that was the first hire. And the second hire we brought in was someone on the demand side. We actually, for the first probably 3 or 4 years of our existence as a business, spent very little on paid marketing. Our focus was, let's really invest in building this organic community. It's a strategy that takes a bit longer, but it can obviously have bigger payoffs down the line. So, what we were looking for there is someone who could be agile, who again was willing to try different things, who wasn't going to be constrained by, budget or lack thereof, right? And I think the when you're making these early hires, whatever department it is at a startup, but particularly in marketing, you're looking for people who are drivers, not passengers, right? You're looking for people who are, adaptable, who are resourceful, who, just want to be thrown at a problem, versus people who have, maybe done the journey several times before and, need a team and need budget and, are looking for reasons why they might not be successful at something versus reasons why something can work.
Yeah, so similarly, when I hire, you look for that. It's almost like an intangible, do they like to learn? Will they solve stuff on their own quality?
Hmm.
It's really hard to, and can they logically think through things, I think is the other piece. That's really hard to hire for, or it can be. At least I've made the mistake before of hiring someone who I thought was great at that, and they were actually just good at interviewing. So I'm curious on that. Like, how do you dig in to find those type of people? Because it can be difficult.
It can be. And I think the other challenge is that, when you're a very early stage business, the perfect candidate, why would they come work for you? Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that, you need to consider as a company at that stage, is that, you're pitching the candidate, you're selling them on the vision. And, sometimes obviously you're a company that has a lot of very early growth or fantastic pedigree in terms of, founding team or, early customers, innovation. For us and for me, a lot of the focus was, okay, how do we find undiscovered talent? People who have the potential to go and achieve these things, but maybe haven't done it yet. And that is challenging to interview for, right? Because you're interviewing for aptitude, right? Really more than anything else. And there are certain times where you can see it straight away, right? But those candidates are, I think, very rare. I think, where I've done this well or been successful is, really helping or really getting a candidate to talk through and explain how they'd approach, certain situations, and going deep, using a whiteboard and trying to almost role play how someone would approach a certain situation.
Yeah.
Versus just asking kind of a standard list of interview questions. Because as you say, there are people that just develop skills around interviewing versus skills around, practical action.
Yeah, no, definitely. I was thinking back to an interview of mine at a startup where I spent the whole time on a whiteboard terrified, thinking I did it wrong because I kept collaborating and asking for help. And it turned out that's what they were looking for, right? Is could someone think through things, bounce ideas off each other and grow? And I do think the interesting thing when you find those people, at least from my experience, and it might be the same for you, is they can often grow with the company. So they'll start and run role, go to a different role, maybe they end up in product or who knows, but they're the type of people that can grow and, morph within the company. One question I do want to ask, you started with content and demand, which as a marketer, I get. As a VC board member, that might have been a hard pitch of, you can't do like a dollars in, dollars out. We're going to run a paid ad. We're going to get exactly this much. So was that a struggle, or were you fortunate to just have, CEO and board members who got it from the jump?
Yeah, look, I'm very fortunate to have a CEO that is a big believer in marketing and is a big believer in the power of, community and content and thought leadership. I think if I was going back and, looking at the early team again, one hire that I might prioritize a little earlier is, a really strong operations leader, right?
Yeah.
Someone who can come in and get all the core systems and reporting set up, can ensure that you have the right data quality in place. You're looking at the right metrics. You're orchestrating the team around the right things. I think, for any marketing leader, that person is, a very important right hand. And, whether you're investing large sums of money in paid marketing or not, you still want to be able to demonstrate the return of the activities that you're doing. And if you don't have that in place, it can be harder for you to justify any kind of resource expenditure on marketing, whether that's to your CEO, to other leaders in the business, or to the board.
Yeah, it's funny. I've asked a few marketers that question, and almost universally, that's the answer I get, is someone on ops to make it less chaotic and organize things and give us a clearer picture, which I think is an interesting learning because it's not the most sexy hire a startup can make, right? But it's arguably one of the most necessary. So I think for anyone, in the shoes that you were in early stage, I think that is a key point to think about the operations side.
It absolutely is. And I think that the reason it's often not prioritized is because at the very early stage, every hire is critical and needs to be justified. And it's, you're hiring people who are doing, multiple roles already. And it's easy to sort of say, oh, well, so-and-so can look at this as part of their remit. The problem is if you don't prioritize it, you don't do it right. And if you don't do it right, then you have to do it again later. And, you're missing a lot of historical information. It's much more painful. So yeah, if you have the ability to invest in that early on, I would say 100% you should. Content, though, I do maintain is incredibly important, even in an age of, AI-driven content generation, right?
Mhm.
In many ways, it makes it more important because standing out, having a distinct point of view is harder than ever and more important than ever, right? What is authentically yours as a company to say? And, lean into that, whatever the channel is. It doesn't need to be every channel. It could be podcast, could be, could be blogs. It could be something else. It could be TikTok, right? Who knows? But find whatever that is and really try and own it.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like, it's getting easier and easier to create bad content, I'd argue, but kind of getting harder to create good content and stand out. I think that's the world we're living in. Like, we're inundated with kind of nonsense content that you can tell is AI generated. So the ones who spend the time, I think, will stand out. So I do want to talk, we talked kind of early stage, first couple hires. It's obviously a very different world you're in now, managing a very large team, overseeing it all. And that growth path, a lot of it probably happened on the job, right? Organically as you grow. I assume not all of it, though. I assume there's people you had to lean on, things you had to go learn. So mostly because this is not the common path, right? Normally someone stays early stage, gets booted for someone who has that experience, Series C, Series D. So how did you manage to grow and learn and progress along the way?
I think whenever you're a leader at a very fast growing startup, you have to be very conscious of the leader that the business needs you to be, right? And that's going to have ramifications for where you invest your time, right? Where you invest your resources, the things that are more important, let's say for marketing. So the earlier stages, demand is everything, right? You have to kind of build that early funnel. Things like brand become more important later, but it also has significant ramifications for who you need to be in different situations. And, if you look at a late stage company, who you need to be changes far, far slower. In a startup, it can be a matter of weeks or months, right?
Yeah.
The business needs you to be something else or someone else, right? And, I think someone's ability to be successful and move through those stages is very tightly tied to their ability to morph from one quarter to the next and keep up, right? And look, I'm lucky to have some really fantastic mentors, and I'm lucky to have a CEO and founding team that obviously kind of believed in me from the beginning. But yeah, it's a lot of hard work, and you have to have a growth mindset, and you have to be committed to the business and to the mission, right? And I think if you are, a lot of those things become easier.
Yeah, I think the being committed to, like you said, the company mission is important, because the work, in marketer number one, the work you're doing there is very different than leading a team of 50. And for some people, they just don't like doing parts of it, right? Some people love that early stage. I hate to use the word hustle, but go, do the thing, and don't really like as much the process, people, and management side. And maybe that's okay, and they live in that realm. But I think if, like you said, you believe in the company mission, you're along for the journey, and there's kind of a bigger goal, it makes it easier to maybe look past that and find the parts that you do like, and you can fit and grow that way.
Absolutely. And look, it's a little bit of a paradox, right? Promotions tend to happen when someone performs strongly in an individual contributor capacity.
Yeah.
And the active management is entirely different to
Yeah.
the skills that help someone advance to that level. So I think it's committing and trying to understand that, your role is different, and where you need to spend your time is different, and trying to find, mentors, people that can help you along that journey. There's obviously some fantastic books, etc., out there, podcasts, and it's, trying to get 1% better every day and kind of model the folks that, you've come across that you think did this really well.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think one other area I want to go into before we wrap here is, we talked about, your early stage team, your first couple hires, maybe, that one change you mentioned, if you could go back. I'm curious now, with a large marketing team, how you have that structured, and maybe some of the mistakes and learnings along the way and how that evolved.
Yeah, so the team is broken down into a few core areas. We have revenue marketing, so operations, digital campaigns. That also encompasses our BDR function and ABM and field marketing. Obviously BDRs can sit within different areas of the business. sales, marketing. Typically, I've seen scenarios where they've sat in HR as well. So it's it tends to be the team that gets passed around. Personally, I'm a big believer of them being part of the marketing organization because I think it creates really strong connectivity around top of funnel activities.
Yep.
And then we have kind of corporate marketing, which is, everything content, social, customer, and product and solution marketing as well. So these are obviously three pretty standard pillars for an enterprise marketing organization, and I think work well. The thing that you have to be really careful about is ensuring that those areas of the business don't become siloed, right? Because your job as a marketer is can really be heavily simplified to creating the story and distributing the story, right? And if those two areas of your team or those areas of your team are disconnected, right, then you're obviously not doing the core job, the core mandate that the business is asking for you. So making sure that you have strong connectivity between the teams, making sure you have good collaboration, and creating rituals to bring people together, and rituals around kind of planning of campaigns and roadmaps for different kind of content and launch is incredibly important.
Yeah, I think so. That cross-functional kind of collaboration, working together. Are you guys now remote or back in the office? Like, what's the situation there?
Yeah, so Beamery is a global business. So my team is distributed across North America. We have a big hub in London, and there are some folks across Europe as well. We are hybrid in London.
Yeah.
And North America, we have a few kind of smaller hubs, but in general, folks are pretty spread geographically. So it makes in-person collaboration hard for everyone.
Yeah.
I'm personally of the belief that there's nothing that can replace it. And, you don't need to be in person for everything, but there are some things that are, 10x more efficient and effective in person. So allowing and creating room for that is very important.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that, actually. Like, as an employee, I love remote work. It's just easier. I can be in my office. Don't have the commute. You can run my kids to school. It's not an issue of any of that. The downside is, like you said, actually planning, being strategic, and I would argue even growing the relationships, especially on a team like yours that's a decent size.
Yep.
There's a lot to be said of just knowing that person in the other department and having a relationship with them. And that's really, really hard to do remote. I mean, you try, and there's companies built around it. I worked at one built around it, but it's very, very difficult. So I'm curious what you're doing there, maybe not on the planning strategic side, but just on the get your team to build relationships side.
We talk about one thing at Beamery quite a lot, which is, assuming positive intent, right? Because I think when you don't have the benefit of a strong personal relationship with someone, and when your only interactions are over Zoom or Slack or Teams or whatever it is, and, you see, or someone takes longer to get back to you than you expected, right? Or, they misunderstand a work task or a work project, it's easy to jump to a conclusion, right? Slack is a terrible communicator of tone, for example, right? So
exactly. Yeah.
You can read into a message something that might not be there. And we often talk about, assuming that someone has the best and most positive intent in these situations. I think if it's possible as well, trying to bring people together on an infrequent basis to create a baseline in the relationship is a really fantastic idea. We ran a marketing offsite. The first global offsite, actually, we've done as a team a few months ago.
Nice.
That was incredibly valuable, right? Because it brought people together who don't interact on a daily basis. It created personal relationships. It allowed us to have some kind of deep sessions and create trust, right? Because everything that you want to do as a team, it's made so much more effective by trust. If you want to have a culture of transparent communication, that only works if you have the trust. Trust is much easier to create in that type of form, even if it's just 48 hours. So that's been huge for us, and something, again, that I would obviously recommend for folks listening in.
Yeah, I think people, they're so busy trying to hit the target and the goal, sometimes they overlook that personal, emotional aspect, which I think pays dividends in the long run. So awesome to see you all focusing on that. I want to end with one last question. So we I find personally, I learn a lot from mistakes or things people would change or things I did wrong. And you mentioned, the ops hire, like that's one thing you would have done earlier. I'm curious across this journey as well, like going back, is there one thing where you could say, yeah, I wish I would have done that a little bit differently, or I wish I would have tried this thing earlier, anything like that?
Good question. I think the reality for anyone who's, built a company from kind of the beginning, all the way through to where Beamery is today, is that there are thousands of mistakes.
Yeah.
And things that you wish you would do differently. I think for us, where we started, we were really focused on, and maybe I'll give a little bit of context just for folks to understand.
Yep.
We started out as a company that sold, into talent acquisition, right? And more specifically, kind of the tactical areas of talent acquisition that we're handling, sourcing and pre-qualification of candidates, as well as the kind of marketing and communication to candidates. I think we took too long as a business to try and get to the executive level so that we could sell down into accounts versus just up. And, if you're selling to 4,500 star businesses and you don't have a relationship with the C-level executives, it does become harder, and you're at a disadvantage in competitive cycles, and you're also at a disadvantage when someone does become a customer, right? Because you don't have that executive relationship. So I think that was an early mistake we made, and obviously it's something we've rectified. But probably one thing I would point back to, because that also gives you an ability to have strong stakeholders on the customer marketing side, right? And great advocates who are able to speak to business value versus just kind of tactical value in their day-to-day role.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. It's such a different motion, both on the sales, marketing, and CS side as well, that it's not a flip a switch, make that change. Like it's an organized, you have to have the whole go-to-market team organized and planned to make that transition.
100%.
So yeah, I think that's a key one for our listeners. Well, Ben, thank you. That was a lot of info about your journey. If anyone wants to, follow along, connect, learn more about Beamery, where should they go?
Beamery, the website is easiest. So just www.beamery.com. And for folks who want to connect, they can find me on LinkedIn, just Ben Slater at Beamery. And happy to answer any additional questions. So just shoot me a connect or a message.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ben.
Thanks, Dustin.
Thanks for listening to this episode. My key takeaway is the importance of taking a long-term approach from the very start. So Ben's first hire was a content person, and they made a commitment out the gate to building organic brand thought leadership. They focused on marketing that really compounds over time instead of just doubling down on things like PPC to capture an in-market audience. So a bit of a gutsy play where you're trying to get that traction, but it shows that it did work in this case. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll be back next Tuesday with a new episode.